The graduation address today gives us the opportunity to hear from a distinguished member of our alumni community, and today that address will be delivered by Ms. Deborah Glass. Deborah was born over the border in Bega, New South Wales, but raised in Melbourne, schooled at Mount Scopus and graduated in Monash Bachelor of Arts in 1980 and LLB in 1982. Initially, she practiced law in Melbourne before heading abroad, where she spent the better part of 30 years, devoted to an array of corporate and public sector roles. They were diverse, numerous and challenging, and I'm sure in her address she will touch on some of those achievements and the challenges there met. Prior to the conclusion of her tenure overseas, she was awarded the Order of the British Empire for services in that country and to community. Thereafter, she returned to Australia. In 2014, Deborah Glass was appointed the 5th Victorian Ombudsman, and she brought to that role a commitment to fair and reasonable decision-making, public service and sector integrity, and fundamentally the advancement and protection of human rights. You will no doubt have heard over the years in recent news reports and publications some of her determinations. In 2016, she was awarded the Monash University Distinguished Alumni Award given by the Faculty of Law. And with that very brief background, I have great pleasure in welcoming and looking forward to the address that the Ombudsman, Deborah Glass, will give to this graduation.
Congratulations! Watching you just now, I couldn't help reflecting that only a few decades ago, I was where you are now, in this very hall. I didn't then recognise that it was on land that had never been ceded by the people of the Kulin nations. But let me now acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Now, back then, like many of you, my parents were somewhere in the back rows, and I was feeling excited, proud, and a bit nervous about what I was going to do next. And look at me now, with the least impressive gown on this stage. I have a Bachelor of Laws from this university, and I haven't, as many of you have just received, and I haven't added any gold braid or fancy hats since then. But here I am, the 5th Victorian Ombudsman. Rather to my surprise, a member of the FW2 club, first woman to be in the role. So let me reflect on the journey from law student, more interested in the freedom of university life than the interior of the law library, to Victorian Ombudsman, and let me share a few stories from my journey which I hope will plant some seeds for yours. Of course, my journey didn't begin at Monash, but my 5 years here had an impact. And I don't mean the mud you had to trek through to get to the car park, which, by the way, used to be free, or the psychotropic haze emerging from the small cafe, or being blasted by third-rate rock bands in the smoky, beery rooms of the Knot. I do occasionally marvel that I got a degree at all. I was so busy having a good time. I chose Monash because it was not an establishment university. It was something of an upstart with a strong social justice ethos. and a law school that had poached the best and brightest from Melbourne University. And I must pay tribute to one of its founders, Professor Louis Waller, who died sadly 2 weeks ago. He's not only regarded by at least half the judiciary as the best teacher ever and a towering figure in law reform, he was also one of the kindest and most modest heroes you could meet. After I became Ombudsman, he introduced me at several speaking events and was courteous enough not to mention how close I came to failing one of his classes. But I did get my degree, and I got a job as an article clerk. Now, I know many people who went on to build happy legal careers, but I knew by the end of my first day that I didn't want to be a lawyer. I don't recall if it was the experience of the commute, standing on a freezing platform in my navy gabardine suit with a skirt below the knee because you couldn't wear trousers in those days, or figuring out how to use a dictaphone, or being paid less than the tea lady, but I felt there had to be more to life than working in a law firm. I also felt, as a young lawyer back in the 80s, you had to be better than a man to get to the same place. I know there are women lawyers of my generation who did very well staying put, but maybe I had to leave the country to get where I did, and where I never planned to go. If anyone had told me that I would come back 30 years later as the Ombudsman, I probably would have wondered what they were smoking. So I stayed in the law long enough to buy a one-way ticket to Europe, and off I went, with dreams of becoming a great travel writer. I realised pretty quickly that wasn't even going to pay for repairs to my rucksack. So when my savings ran out in Switzerland, I saw an ad in the local paper for trainees with an international investment bank. I brandished my Monash law degree, and rather to my surprise, I got the job. Sometimes you go for things because they are unknown, or because the other options, like waitressing or going back to Australia, seem so much worse. The corporate world was pretty exciting at first. Business class travel and fancy hotels and intense late nights preparing presentations for senior management. But even though I learned a lot, I realised I just didn't care enough about making money. Thus began my long career in the public sector. First in Hong Kong, where I joined the Securities and Futures Commission. I loved using the knowledge I'd gained in the corporate world to promote the public interest. Sometimes you go for things because you just know they will be right for you. After nearly 10 years, I moved to London, and then got to one of those mid-career points when I had no fixed notions about what to do next. I wanted to stay in the public sector, and I got involved in independent investigation into police. Sometimes you go for things because of what they are not. Not corporate, not financial services. But I learnt rapidly. It was tough, dealing with grieving, sometimes angry families following a death in police custody, hostile police officers, a media and political environment more focused on headlines than facts. I thought I'd share a couple of war stories from those days. I found women need to prove themselves more than men, and soon after I started in that role, I was asked to become the policy lead for the police use of firearms, about which I knew nothing. I asked an expert for some advice, and he said the best training I could do was the Gold Command course, a residential course for senior police officers. So I turned up on the first day to a room in which I was the only woman and the only civilian. The rest of the class of very senior police officers assumed I was there as an observer. And I thought, I am not going to be patronised. So I made it clear that I expected to be tested like everyone else. It was one of the toughest things I have ever done, but I got through it. Sometimes you have to be prepared to fail. I'm proud of many things from those days, but most of all about my involvement with the Hillsborough investigation, so let me share a brief vignette from that. About a year before the end of my term, an explosive new report was published into the Hillsborough disaster, in which 96 people, all Liverpool fans, had died in a massive crush at a football stadium in the north of England 23 years before. Now, all the usual inquiries had followed such a disaster, but the official verdict was accidental death, and the myth abounded for decades that the fans themselves were responsible for the tragedy. So when a new report exposing the injustice was published in 2012, I remembered thinking, we need to do this. The official response to a political storm of something must be done is usually to convene a meeting. So most of the senior police and police officials in the land, as it happened that day, all men except me and my colleague, were gathered around a huge table in Westminster. The chief constables were discussing which of them was going to investigate Hillsborough. I remember waiting for a pause and then saying, actually, we're going to investigate this. The independent body will do this investigation. I still remember the silence and the body language of what remained unsaid. In their case, who do you think you are, girlie, taking on something as big as this? And in my case, get your tanks off my lawn. This is my jurisdiction. We're going to do it. And we did. It was a job that will never win a popularity contest. But it is better to be right than popular, and justice is its own reward. Sometimes when the brickbats are flying thick and fast, you wonder if it's all worth it. But you stay with it, because it is. I came to the end of my term, and as T.S. Eliot said, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And so I came back to Melbourne, knowing the place and myself so much better than I did. This time I applied for a job because I knew it was right, my ideal job, to deal with complaints about public services in Victoria, not including the police. So the journey continues in the current role, I trust, until 2024. As I said to my staff on the first day, you don't start a 10-year term with a plan. You start with a set of values and beliefs in integrity, fairness, social justice, human rights. I believe in working with people wherever possible to achieve change. I have the powers of a royal commission, but I believe the most impactful powers are the ones you don't need to use because everyone knows you have them. It is a rare and wonderful privilege to be a constitutionally independent officer of Parliament, making decisions in the interests of justice. Sometimes you go on a journey with no destination in mind, but looking back down the road, it all makes sense. So what pearls can I pull out of this bag of oysters? I hope you've gleaned a few. Don't try to plan everything. Sometimes the best things happen when you're not looking for them. Life is full of opportunities and pitfalls you cannot even imagine when you begin the journey. Be willing to take risks. Learn the art of navigation. You need to recalibrate when things don't go as planned, because things will not go as planned. Do the right thing. Your integrity matters more than just about anything. Believe in yourself. Women especially, don't listen to the little voice in your ear that says you're not good enough. Finally, you may be surprised at what you can learn from your parents. Let me acknowledge my own good fortune. My mother was an early pioneer for women's equality, the child of refugees, passionate about education and determined to improve her own. My father was not only a distinguished physician, but a much better typist than my mother, and very happy to type her master's thesis. So it never occurred to me there was something I could not do. Sadly, my mother is long gone, but my father is here today. Thank you, Dad, for your love and support, for your typing skills, and for not being bound by gender stereotypes. Graduates, don't leave it. Don't leave it too long to thank your parents and teachers. I know every one of you has worked hard to be here today. To each of you I say, this is the beginning. You've got that piece of paper. Use it as a springboard. In large or small ways, in whatever your field of endeavour and the relationships you form with others, each of you has the capacity to make the world a better place. You owe it to yourselves to be the best you can be. It's time to go out into the world and make a difference. Good luck and thank you.